Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that honestly feels like it belongs in a spy novel. But it's actually straight out of the 2025 parliamentary elections in Moldova. It's a story about branding, camouflage, and the very, very blurry line between being a centrist and being, well, a Trojan horse.
It really is a fascinating case study. I mean, it forces us to ask, when a politician uses a word like Europe or freedom, do they mean the same thing you do?
Exactly.
Or are they using the dictionary of a completely different geopolitical power?
Exactly. We are talking about the alternative bloc. In Romanian, that's Bloc-o-Politic Alternativa.
Right.
Now, on the surface, when they launched in January 2025, they looked great. They were sort of the shiny new toy in Moldovan politics.
Yeah, they claim to be pro-European, social democratic, and green.
The whole package. On paper, they were the third way.
The rational middle ground between the West and Russia.
Right. But then you start digging into the sources we have for today. You know, reports in the election, some deep analysis from the Carnegie Endowment, the frantic accusations from their opponents, and you realize this wasn't just a simple new party.
No, the ruling party called them a threat to national security?
Critics said they were designed specifically to sabotage EU accession from the inside.
And that is the central tension we need to unpack. Were they a genuine attempt to create a moderate force for people tired of the extremes? Or were they a sophisticated strategy to redefine what pro-European means in a way that actually benefits Moscow?
So our mission today is to figure out who these people are, what they actually proposed, and why their emergence caused such a massive stir in Eastern Europe. And I think the only way to understand alternative is to look at the people who built it.
Absolutely.
Because this wasn't a grassroots movement of fresh faces.
Far from it.
It reads like the Avengers of the opposition.
Yeah.
Or maybe the Legion of Doom, depending on who you ask.
Let's stick with heavy hitters for now.
Fair enough. So the bloc forms on January 31st, 2025. Yeah. And the lineup is stacked. You have Ceban, the mayor of Chisinau.
The big name.
You have Alexandr Stoianoglo, who had just run for president in 2024. You have a former prime minister, Ion Jacu, and a former key advisor to a communist president, Mark Tchuk.
It is a very specific collection of personalities. You've got the technocrat, the prosecutor, the bureaucrat, and the ideologue. But what's fascinating here is that while they represent different parties, Ceban has his national alternative movement, Jacu has his party of development and consolidation, they all share one very specific, very telling trajectory.
Which is?
They all migrated from the left, specifically the Russia-friendly communist or socialist spheres of Moldovan politics.
Okay, let's break that down. Ion Ceban is probably the most visible one here.
Yes. Ceban is the classic example of political evolution or, rebranding. He started as a high-ranking communist, then he was a socialist, known for being very aggressive, holding megaphones at protests. But then he pivots. He becomes the mayor of Chisinau, puts on a suit, stops shouting, and starts focusing on sidewalks and parks. He cultivates this managerial persona.
The I'm just here to fix the potholes approach.
Exactly. But his roots are deep in that pro-Russian ecosystem. Then you have Ion Jacu, who was prime minister under Igor Dodon, a staunchly pro-Russian president.
And Mark Tchuk.
He's in a league of his own. He was the gray cardinal of the Communist Party for years.
So you have this group of people who spent decades aligned with Moscow-friendly policies, suddenly linking arms in 2025 and saying, we are the alternative, we are the new centrists.
And the question the electorate had to ask was, is this genuine? Can a leopard change its spots? Or is this just a rebranding exercise because the old pro-Russia label had become, well, toxic after the war in Ukraine?
Let's look at what they were actually selling. Because if this was a trap, the bait was incredibly sweet.
Oh, yeah.
I was reading through their manifesto, and honestly, if you didn't know the names attached to it, you'd think it was a standard Western European social democratic platform.
That was the design. It was meticulously crafted. They pitched themselves as social democrats. They had a strong anti-corruption message, which everyone in Moldova wants to hear.
And the social programs were very specific. They didn't just say, we help people. They had detailed plans for supporting families, the elderly. But there was one detail that really caught my eye.
What was that?
They specifically highlighted support for people with autism and ADHD.
That is a very modern, very specific policy choice. It signals we care about the neglected details. It softens the image. It makes them look compassionate and progressive, not like old-school Soviet apparatchiks.
And they also had a Green Moldova program.
Right. Sustainable development. Again, these are buzzwords that appeal to younger voters, to urban voters. It's a way of signaling we are modern. We aren't stuck in the past.
Okay, so they have the soft policies. But in Moldova, every election eventually comes down to the big question. East or West? EU or Russia?
Always.
And the alternative bloc explicitly said, we are pro-European.
They did. But, and here is where we have to put on our reading glasses, we have to look at the fine print. This is what political analysts call the yes but strategy.
Yes, we want Europe, but...
Exactly. They said they wanted to join the EU, but they attached conditions to that membership that were, frankly, poison pills.
Let's unpack those. The biggest one was about Transnistria.
Correct. For context, Transnistria is a breakaway region in the east of Moldova. It's been controlled by pro-Russian separatists since the early 90s, and Russia keeps troops there. It's a frozen conflict.
And the European Union has been pretty clear about this recently, right? They said Moldova could potentially join the EU without reintegrating Transnistria first.
Right. The EU learned from Cyprus they don't want to give the separatists or Moscow a veto over Moldova's future. They are willing to integrate the main territory first and deal with the frozen conflict later.
So the EU says, come on in, we'll figure out the border issue later. But the alternative bloc said,
no. They argued that EU membership should only happen after the country is reintegrated. We must be whole before we are European.
Which sounds patriotic on the surface. No one left behind.
But think about the implications. By insisting on reintegration first, they are effectively handing the keys to Moldova's future back to the separatists and to Russia. If Moscow doesn't want Moldova in the EU, they just refuse to settle the Transnistria issue. And since the alternative bloc made that a precondition, Moldova stays out of the EU forever.
That is actually brilliant.
Yeah.
In a dark way. You frame an impossible roadblock as a patriotic duty.
It's a classic stalling tactic disguised as principle, and they did the exact same thing with the concept of neutrality.
This was the consolidated neutrality idea.
Yes. Now, Moldova is already neutral. It's in the constitution. But the alternative bloc campaigned on the idea that this neutrality needed to be consolidated before joining the EU.
But the EU isn't NATO. It's an economic union. Austria is in the EU, and they're neutral.
Yeah.
Ireland is neutral. Why does this matter?
Because in the information war, blurring the line between the EU and NATO is a key strategy. Analysts pointed out that this rhetoric mirrors Russian propaganda perfectly. By constantly talking about neutrality in the context of the EU, you scare voters.
You imply that joining the European market somehow puts you at military risk?
Or that it violates your constitution. Yeah. So on the surface, we want Europe, but in the details, we want Europe only under conditions that are currently impossible to meet.
Precisely. And that ambiguity allowed them to target a very specific type of voter. I think some analysts called it the neither-nor electorate.
That's it. People who are stuck in the middle.
Right. People who are tired of Russia and the poverty associated with the past, but who are also disappointed with the current pro-Western government.
Maybe they feel the reforms are too painful, or they are terrified that the war in Ukraine will spill over. The alternative bloc offered them a safe harbor. We can be European, but on our own terms. No war, no conflict, just nice social programs.
It sounds very comforting. But the ruling party, the Party of Action and Solidarity, or PAS, they didn't buy it for a second.
Not for a second, no. PAS and various investigative journalists went on the offensive. They labeled them false pro-Europeans and Trojan horses, and they started pulling out the receipts.
Oh, the receipts were long. I was looking at the background of Ceban again. In 2014, when Moldova was signing its initial association agreement with the EU,
the first big step west,
Ceban wasn't just skeptical. He was literally protesting in Brussels against it. And he promoted referendums in Gagauzia that sought independence and alignment with the Russia-led customs union.
That's a pretty clear track record.
And then you have Mark Tekut. This part blew my mind. In September 2025, right before the election, he publicly stated that the Kozak Memorandum from 2003 should have been signed.
That was a huge controversy, and it really let the mask slip for a moment.
Okay, for our listeners who might not be experts on 2003 Moldovan treaties, what was the Kozak Memorandum?
It was a plan proposed by Russia to settle the Transnistria conflict. But the terms were devastating for Moldova's sovereignty. It would have federalized the country, giving Transnistria veto power over national decisions.
Okay.
And, crucially, it would have kept Russian military bases in Moldova for another 20 years.
So it would have legally turned Moldova into a Russian satellite state.
Essentially, yes. It was widely seen as a bullet Moldova dodged. But here's Tukchik in 2025 running on a pro-European ticket saying, we should have signed it. It was a mistake not to.
That is incredible. I want to join Europe, but I really wish we had locked in Russian troops for 2 decades.
It certainly complicates the branding. This statement actually sparked protests by war veterans just days later. It reminded everyone exactly who these people used to be.
And then you have Alexandr Stoianoglo, the former presidential candidate. He boycotted the 2024 EU referendum.
He claimed he wasn't against Europe, just against the government holding the vote. But, when you boycott the actual vote on European integration, actions tend to speak louder than nuances.
However, I think it's really important to bring in some balance here, because it's easy to just say, okay, they are Russian spies.
It's more complex.
The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace had a more nuanced take. They didn't just paint them as puppets.
No, and this is a crucial distinction if we want to understand the modern political landscape. The Carnegie analysts noted that there is no evidence that the alternative bloc is supported by Russia in the same direct way as, say, the Shore Party.
The Shore Party being the ones who are essentially caught trying to buy votes with bags of cash.
Right. Those are proxies, paid actors. The alternative bloc appears to be more organic. They represent a genuine segment of the Moldovan elite businessmen, former officials who are skeptical of the West. They have business ties to the East, or they just culturally align more with Russia. But they also know they can't win elections by being openly pro-Putin anymore.
So they aren't taking orders from a handler in Moscow. They're just acting in their own self-interest, which happens to align with Moscow.
Exactly. And Carnegie argued that the Trojan horse label was partly a campaign tactic by the ruling party. By painting the alternative bloc as Russian agents, the government was trying to consolidate the pro-European vote.
It polarizes the landscape.
Basically saying, if you don't vote for us, you're voting for the enemy. It leaves no room for a loyal opposition. You're either with us or against the country.
Right. And that polarization can be dangerous, too. But just when the debate about their ideology was getting nuanced, we got hit with a good old-fashioned scandal.
The ballot scandal.
This is where the story turns into a crime thriller. September 24, 2025, 4 days before the election.
It was a bombshell. Police raided a printing shop in China based on an intelligence tip.
And inside, they find a stack of 200 election ballots. Now, finding ballots in a print shop is normal if they're printing them legally, but these weren't.
No. First off, private print shops shouldn't be printing official ballots. Second, these weren't blank. They were already stamped, voted for the alternative bloc.
Okay, so the prime minister and the police immediately come out and describe a carousel scheme. I think we need to explain this because it's a very specific piece of election fraud tradecraft. How does a carousel work?
It's a clever, dirty way to guarantee that a bought vote stays bought. See, if I pay you 50 euros to vote for my party, I have a problem.
What's that?
You could take my money, go into the booth, and vote for someone else. The secret ballot protects you.
Right. I can promise you anything, but once the curtain closes, I vote my conscience.
Exactly. The carousel breaks that protection. Here's how it works. The organizer gives you, the paid voter, a fake or stolen ballot outside the polling station. But this ballot is already marked for their candidate.
Like the ones the police found.
Exactly. You hide this pre-marked ballot in your jacket, walk into the polling station, show your ID, and the poll workers give you a real, clean, blank ballot.
So now I have 2 ballots, the clean one in my hand, the pre-marked one in my pocket.
You go into the voting booth, but you don't mark the clean one. You put it in your pocket, you pull out the pre-marked ballot you brought in, and you drop that one in the ballot box.
So the vote is cast for the organizer's candidate. And what happens to the clean ballot?
And here's the key. You walk out of the station with the clean, blank, official ballot in your pocket. You meet the organizer around the corner, you give him the blank ballot, and he pays you.
And then he marks that blank ballot and gives it to the next person in line.
And the carousel turns. It's effective because the organizer gets physical proof, the blank ballot, that the previous person did their job.
So when the police find 200 pre-stamped ballots, that isn't just 200 votes. That is the starter fuel for 200 different carousels that could run all day.
That was the accusation. It implies an industrial scale of fraud.
Now, surely the alternative bloc didn't just say, whoops, you caught us. What was their defense?
Ian Ceban was furious. He admitted the materials were theirs, but he claimed they were just models, like samples for campaign advertising, brochures to show elderly people what the ballot would look like and where to stamp. He demanded an apology from the police for seizing his educational materials.
Officer, these look-alike ballots are just for practice.
The problem was the Central Electoral Commission and the Ministry of Education pointed out that these models looked identical to real ballots. And under Moldovan law, you cannot distribute campaign material that mimics a ballot because it misleads voters.
So whether it was for a criminal carousel scheme or just incredibly deceptive advertising, it was illegal.
Completely illegal. And happening 4 days before the vote, it cast a huge shadow over their clean hands anti-corruption message.
So despite all of this, the controversy, the confusing messaging, the yes but platform, the police raids, people still voted. The election happened. What was the verdict?
The alternative bloc received 125,706 votes. That's 7.96% of the total.
Almost 8%. That's not a landslide, but in a fragmented parliamentary system, that's real power.
It secured them 8 seats out of 101 in parliament. That made them the third largest force in the legislature. They became the kingmakers, potentially.
And then immediately after winning, Ion Ceban pulls a move that I think surprised no one who follows the cynical side of politics.
The classic bait and switch. Ceban was the face of the campaign. He was #1 on a list. His photo was on every billboard. But as soon as the results were confirmed, he announced he would refuse his seat in parliament to remain the mayor of Chisinau.
So he used his personal popularity to drag the party across the finish line. Then step back.
It's a loophole. He knows he is more powerful as mayor than as one of 101 MPs. But for the voters who supported the alternative specifically because they trusted Ceban, well, they felt a bit used.
So now we have this new landscape in Moldova. You have the ruling PAS party, you have the socialists, and now you have this 8-seat block of alternatives sitting in the middle. Where do they stand now?
They are firmly in the opposition. But the reactions tell you everything about their ambiguity. The socialists, the openly pro-Russian party, welcomed them with open arms. Igor Dodon saw them as a fantastic wedge to split the pro-European vote.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. Meanwhile, PAS continues to treat them as a pro-Russian force in disguise. And the smaller parties, the ones that actually are centrist or pro-European but didn't make the threshold, they are furious. They feel the alternative bloc sucked up all the oxygen in the room.
So what does this all mean? If we step back from the specific names and numbers of 2025, what does the alternative phenomenon tell us about the world we live in?
It tells us that the battle lines in Eastern Europe, and really in democracies everywhere, are shifting. It used to be very binary.
Right, pro-West versus pro-East, blue flags versus red flags. It was easy to tell who was who.
Now, it's about redefinition. It's about mimicry. The alternative bloc showed that you can carve out a space by using the language of your opponent. They used European integration as a slogan, but they filled it with caveats and conditions that aligned perfectly with Russian interests.
It's like a political deepfake.
In a way, yes. It's a form of hybrid political warfare. It's not just about misinformation, it's about confusing the fundamental terms of the debate.
Right.
If everyone claims to be pro-European, but one side means integration with the West, and the other side means integration eventually, maybe, but only if Russia agrees, the voter becomes disoriented.
And that disorientation creates apathy.
And apathy is a weapon. If you can't convince people to love Russia, you just need to confuse them enough that they stop fighting for Europe. Stalling becomes the victory. You don't need a majority to block EU accession. You just need enough seats and enough conditions to grind the gears to a halt.
That is a sobering thought. It's not just about who wins the election, but about how the definitions of words change.
And how the game is played.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. It's a complex story from a small country, but I think the lessons here apply to any democracy facing external pressure.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a question to chew on. In a world of hybrid warfare and sophisticated political branding, how do you distinguish between a politician having a genuine change of heart and a strategic disguise? When someone says they want the same future you do, are you sure they're looking at the same map?
That's the million-dollar question.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.